Hello and welcome to another edition of Underdog Cinema. We kicked off last week with the great little film The 13th Warrior, and this week is the film I'm most excited about discussing. It's for me the film which, when I think of underrated movies, I think of this film, and it's the 1986 movie Big Trouble in Little China, or should I say John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. Now, John Carpenter for me is my favourite director of all time. If you followed any of my other channels, you will know that I just love his work. I don't think he's the greatest director of all time, but he's certainly my favourite, and he's certainly the director who, at a young age for me, really made me sort of become aware of a director. Because when I was a kid, everybody talked about Steven Spielberg. You knew what a Steven Spielberg film was. You knew, even just implicitly, you knew what his work entailed. And for me, at that time, John Carpenter was the other guy that was like, yeah, I know what a John Carpenter film is. So John Carpenter had a massive impact on me as a kid, and one of the things I looked forward to most was a Friday night. On a Friday night, it was video night. Either my mum and dad would go down to the video store, or I would go down with them, or perhaps go down with a friend or with my brother, and we'd pick up a video and we would come back and we would watch it all together. And Big Trouble in Little China is one of those films that I remember from that time. It's one of those movies that just sort of etched this imprint in my mind. Other movies at that time that I always remember sort of getting out on video that really sort of shocked me that I was able to watch these movies at home. It was things like Return of the Jedi, The Goonies, Explorers, Gremlins, a whole bunch of other films. But Big Trouble in Little China is always one which has a special place in my heart. It was released in 1986, and it started off actually when it was originally envisaged. It was going to be a Western, and you can see that when you watch it, that it was actually going to be set in the 19th century, and you get that feeling from it, that it certainly does have that Western sort of vibe to it. In fact, Kurt Russell, who plays the lead in the film, actually is doing a pretty good John Wayne impersonation. He did Clint Eastwood as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, and in Big Trouble in Little China he was doing his John Wayne impersonation. So the film is a real sort of mashup. Again, last week when we talked about The 13th Warrior, we talked about how films can be cross-genre, and that I've got a soft spot for films which do that and manage to pull it off. And Big Trouble in Little China is just one of the best examples of it. It is an adventure movie, it is an action film, it's a comedy, it's almost got elements of sort of self-parody as well. It's got magic realism in it, and it's got, it's a martial arts film. It's got so many different types of genre within it, and that's one of the reasons I just absolutely love it. So I think when watching it, it was always something as a kid that it just it was like an overload on my senses, watching this film and just not really being able to take in how amazing it was. So for the plot, for the people that don't really know what the film is or haven't seen it, and you better go and watch it after this, Big Trouble in Little China follows our main character Jack Burton, who's played by Kurt Russell. And Jack Burton is this trucker. He drives a truck called the Pork Chop Express, and he goes around America, around the country, sort of delivering goods from one city to the next. And you get the feeling that he's been on a number of adventures in his life. But he's also a character who is very much out of his element in almost every sense. Almost everywhere he goes, he sort of talks the talk, but he doesn't really walk the walk. And that's part of what makes this film special, but we'll get back to that. Now, Jack finds himself in a situation where he goes to meet some friends who are sort of involved in the local Chinese community, and he gets caught up in this ancient battle between good and evil. You have the evil spirit Lo Pan, who has been cursed for, I think it's 1,000 years, a very long time. He's been cursed, and the curse that he has is that he is not able to enjoy flesh. He's not able to enjoy the material. He doesn't have a real body. He's like a ghost, a spectre. But the curse is said to be lifted if he marries and then sacrifices a green-eyed girl to some sort of deity which will then lift the curse off of him. And on the other side you have Egg Shen, who's this sort of scruffy local wizard or mage type character who is trying to defeat Lopan. And Jack sort of stumbles into this battle, and again, even if he's normally out of his element, he's even more out of his element here. And he has this sidekick character who is like his friend, and what's brilliant about it is that the sidekick is actually the lead and the lead is the sidekick. That's the sort of premise of the film. That's one of the main conceits of the film, which is that actually the main character is out of his element and it's the sidekick who is actually always there on hand and always knows what to do. That's where a lot of the comedy comes from. The sidekick character Wang Chi is the sort of pivotal character of the film, really. He's the one that's not only introducing Jack Burton to this sort of Eastern culture where there are demons and wizards and warlocks and all these strange things going on, but he's also the sort of he's the pivotal character for the audience as well, because we are Jack Burton, we are getting sort of brought into that world which some of us may not be that familiar with unless you've been a sort of big fan of Hong Kong cinema. So as the film progresses, the main idea of it is that there's been a kidnap and it's all to do with these green-eyed girls, and the green-eyed girls are going to have to be sacrificed to this god so that Lopan can become whole again. But the problem is that he actually kidnaps two girls with green eyes. One initially is the fiance of the sidekick character, and then the other is actually a girl that Jack becomes quite enamoured with himself, so that's a sort of love interest. She's played by Kim Cattrall. So it's just a crazy film, and trying to synopsise, I'm trying to do my best, but it is a little bit difficult because it is all over the place, and that's part of the charm of this film. So Jack and this sort of ragtag bunch go in search of trying to save these girls from this sort of evil demonic man known as Lopan. So that's really the gist of it, but it doesn't entirely convey what the film is, and that was part of the problem when it came out. You see, it was marketed completely as something that it wasn't. The people, the producers and the marketing team seemed to think that they were getting an action film with someone like a Stallone in the lead. And apparently one of the producers on one of the screenings turned round to John Carpenter or Kurt Russell and said, of Jack Burton, the main character, he's not very good, is he? So they didn't really get that that's the comedy of it, is that Jack Burton is always out of his element. If you watch Indiana Jones, sometimes he has that as well, and there's a charm to that where Indy is slightly out of his element. You see a look in his face where he's kind of like getting beaten up or doesn't really know if he's going to get out of this. And all this film does is it takes that to the extreme where the sort of main lead is really out of his element. But it's an absolute blast. But the problem was at the time that it was marketed as if it was going to be this big budget action film but with a sort of serious lead, and it's just not that. But it is a phenomenal action movie, it is a great adventure film, it's got all of that. It's just that people didn't know what to expect, and I believe what happened is that they pulled the marketing, and then the word of mouth wasn't very good, and a lot of the critical response to it at the time wasn't great either. A lot of people just lampooned the movie and said it wasn't very good, but luckily and thankfully the film has been re-evaluated now and it has a growing cult following, and I'm thinking that one day, probably in the not too distant future, Big Trouble in Little China will actually become a mainstream film like it was supposed to be. You know, it'll become a film which is really appreciated by the majority of people. But it's a film that every time I introduce it to someone who hasn't watched it, they look at the cover or they see the trailer and they go, I don't really fancy that, and then when they watch it they're just like, this is great, and then everybody starts quoting lines from it. It's just such a quotable film as well. One of the biggest tragedies of Big Trouble in Little China is that it really marked the end of Carpenter's ambition to become a Hollywood director. After this film he just decided that he really didn't want to work within the Hollywood system, and the reason for that was the way he was treated, the way the film was treated. It was treated abominably, and the fact that it was marketed as something else, and they didn't put out they didn't even put out much marketing in the first place, but then when they did, they got it wrong. So he was just really, really down about that and despondent. So after that, he went back to sort of doing more independent movies. And I think that's a shame, because I would have loved to have seen him do more studio pictures, because I think with a good budget behind him, Carpenter showed what he could really do, which was something really, really special. I cannot recommend Big Trouble in Little China enough. There are just so many things about it that I love. Little point of trivia, the Ghostbusters firehouse from the film Ghostbusters, funnily enough, is actually used in Big Trouble in Little China as well. What's funny about it when you watch it is that there's a tacked on beginning which doesn't really make any sense. And when I read about the film and listened to the commentary on the DVD, which by the way is one of the best commentaries for any film, it's just phenomenal. Definitely check that out. I mean, you don't even find out much about the movie, but it's just Carpenter and Kurt Russell sitting, chilling, having some beers and just talking smack. It's really, really great. But what's interesting about it is that they mentioned that the beginning is actually tacked on. It's a false beginning. It was put there because the studios didn't think that the film would make much sense, and also they thought that if they had this little introduction where a character's talking about what's going to happen in the film and talk about it with a sort of serious tone, it would make Jack Burton to be more capable than he actually is. So you have the Egg Shen character sitting with someone, I don't even know what it is. I think it's like a guy in a I don't know if it's the police or court or whatever. But the funny thing is, they don't return to this. This should have been, if they were going to put it in, it should have been like, should have bookended the movie, but it doesn't. They just have it at the start and then it's gone, and then they just continue with the film. So it is a little bit strange that way. There's some great effects in this film, really some great effects. I mean, some of them, some people might think are a bit hokey, but I think the sort of neon colour of the film is something that is, it really does convey the sort of otherworldly atmosphere of the movie, that when you think of the Jack Burton character going into this, you know, it's meant to be modern day America, but you realise that there's this sort of old Chinese culture that's sitting there as well, and I think it manages to sort of straddle that line really effectively. I just love the movie. I mean, I could go on about it for hours probably. I could probably do my own commentary on the movie because it's one of my favourite films of all time. But I just think it's so sad that it's been so underrated for so long, and really the biggest sadness of it is the fact that it should have been a franchise. And in fact, I think Carpenter wanted to make it into a franchise. Carpenter at one point even tried to get a television series off the ground with it, and it's just so sad that that never happened, because to me Jack Burton could have been another Indiana Jones. He could have been that iconic, and because the thing is with Jack Burton, even though he sort of bumbles his way through things, he still comes out on top, and there's a sort of charm to that. He doesn't give up, so he is still a hero. Even though he's a bit of a bumbling fool at times, he is a hero, and he's one of my favourite heroes in any Hollywood picture, in any film. So I think that it would have been great to have seen other franchises. I mean, when you think of the franchises in the 80s or from the 70s into the 80s, you had things like Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, they were sort of all horror ones, and you had Indiana Jones films, Jaws movies. There was so many franchises that were going. Excuse me, but Big Trouble in Little China just only got one film, and it's a shame. There are some comic books which have been released since, sort of telling the later adventures of Jack Burton. But here's the thing, here's a thought. I mean, I wouldn't mind someone doing a sequel to this, even if they couldn't get Kurt Russell back on board. I wouldn't actually mind them recasting Jack Burton. I wouldn't want them to remake Big Trouble in Little China. There's no point, because it's such a great movie. But I would love to see more adventures with that character in that world, and I think you could do something really special with that. And it would be fantastic to get the Jack Burton character, if you got the casting right, maybe even got John Carpenter on board in some capacity, and move forward with it. I think there is an audience there now for that, but unfortunately the sort of big corporations that run the movie studios now only really want to look at the sure thing, you know, the movie properties which they know people already have big interest in. So that's Big Trouble in Little China. You have to watch it if you haven't seen it. It's just a blast. I mean, if you look up the word fun in the dictionary, there's a picture of Jack Burton on the Big Trouble in Little China poster. There's not really, but there should be, because that's what this film is. It's just fun. It's a great adventure. And yeah, there's an element of nostalgia that attached to it for me, but I certainly think that the reason I love the film is just because it's so damn good, you know. And if you haven't watched any John Carpenter films, this is a great one to watch, but he never really made anything quite like it again, so or previously. But what was brilliant about Carpenter is that he does have this skewed humour and this skewed perspective on things. Not enough people talk about it with regards to Carpenter's films. A lot of people think that Carpenter's films are very two-dimensional. They're not. They're multi-layered, and just he made some of my favourite films of all time. Big Trouble in Little China is definitely up there. So go check it out. Let me know what you think about it. And as always, I say as always, we've only done this once before, leave any suggestions you've got for underdogs of cinema so that I can then take your idea and steal it, like I said before, and then take the credit for it. No, I will mention you in the video. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.